Joining us now live from Christchurch is Bronwyn Hayward, Professor in the Department of Political Science and International Relations at the University of Canterbury. Professor, what main points of progress have been made since the last report that you think take it in a positive direction?
Well, this is a very important statement. It's called the General Comment 26, which doesn't sound very exciting, but it is extremely important because it brings together all of the evidence building from the IPCC reports, of which I was an author, which note that children in 2020 will experience in their lifetime 4 times more extreme events than their parents and grandparents in terms of storms and droughts and the floods like we're seeing in China tonight. And so these issues are really important. And what the UN comment has said is that the United Nations Convention on the Right of the Child needs to really be thought about in the lens of the effects of environmental degradation and climate change. Children are experiencing a triple planetary crisis: the climate crisis, the collapse of biodiversity, and serious environmental poverty. So they look at what governments should and can do.
And Professor, what is the significance then of this update in empowering children with the legal means to combat climate change in a responsible way?
It's a really good question. What the UN statement can't require governments to make changes, so it can't be enforced. However, it's building off the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, which every country except America has ratified. So most countries already use the UN Convention when they're talking about their legislation, particularly around the interests of children and future generations. In particular, this statement says that governments should find ways to include opportunities for children to participate in environmental decision-making, that they need more information that they can understand and is fairly given to them, and that governments should remove the impediments to children taking legal and class action against businesses and governments themselves who aren't taking enough significant action on environment. So these are really far-reaching recommendations. I understand that many environmental activists will feel this is more UN speak, but actually 121 countries have contributed to this report, and that adds an enormous amount of weight to the moral shift of discussion about what we owe our children and future generations.
And what about accountability, Professor? Where does it lie? Governments, of course. What about corporations and individuals?
Well, this is an interesting statement because it does talk about the responsibilities of businesses to take into consideration the needs and the rights of the child, as well as the responsibilities of the state to ensure that those regulations and laws that are required to protect children are in place. This also provides a way in which the kind of law cases that we're seeing around the world at the moment, where children, particularly, you just spoke about the Montana case, but there have been many cases, including the Netherlands, children taking countries generally to court, have had difficulty in actually making that stick. And this provides now a pathway. There's a clear suggestion that governments should provide opportunities for children and young people to remedy their disputes locally, and then they can escalate this up. And I think alongside the case we've recently seen where university law students from Vanuatu were able to take a case to the United Nations, to the International Court of Criminal Justice, to consider not tackling climate change as being a legal issue, we're starting to see the way in which the United Nations can provide a framework for legal accountability, as well as moral encouragement for governments to do the right thing by their children and future generations.
Professor, we have time for one last question. Another perspective is some argue that the report doesn't go far enough because it's not specific enough. To you, what else is lacking? Which aspects could be improved?
Well, as an author from the IPCC, I actually appreciate the pressure that the 18 legal experts that have been elected by all of the countries in the UN are under here. They're trying to represent a whole diverse range of government views. So while it won't go far enough for many activists, this is actually a very important first step in getting all countries to agree that governments have a responsibility to ensure that children can grow up in clean water, in an environment that protects them, well housed, well educated, and that they have legal responsibilities and will face consequences in court potentially if these responsibilities aren't met. So while it doesn't go far enough, today is a very important first step in a big journey to make the world better for children and young people.
Professor, thank you very much for your insights. That was Professor Bronwyn Hayward from the Department of Political Science and International Relations at the University of Canterbury.